Spending time in the Tongass National Forest is good for my soul. Another visitor found inspiration here, and he put his deep feelings for this land into descriptions that are still unmatched. Day after day in the fine weather we enjoyed, we seemed to float in a true fairyland, each succeeding view seeming more and more beautiful, the one we chanced to have before us the most surprisingly beautiful of all. This forest satisfied John Muir's intense interest in nature and geology. He visited the Southeast Alaska wilderness 4 times in the late 1800s. Tracing shining ways through fjord and sound, past forests and waterfalls, islands and mountains and far azure headlands, it seems as if surely we must at length reach the very paradise of the poets, the abode of the blessed. Muir's Paradise of the Poets became America's largest national forest by presidential proclamation in 1907. The words Muir used so eloquently 100 years ago still inspires those who visit the Tongass today.
There absolutely is no other place in the world like the Tongass National Forest. It's part of something bigger. It's part of the largest remaining temperate rainforest in the world.
Dr. Richard Nelson lives in Sitka and, like John Muir, has written extensively about the Tongass. He's been Alaska State Writer Laureate. His book, The Island Within, won the John Burroughs Medal for Distinguished Natural History Writing. Another book, Make Prayers to the Raven, was the basis for a 5-part public television series. Nelson also produces a statewide radio program based on the natural world of the Tongass.
The Tongass is probably the largest single intact areas of temperate rainforest that are found anywhere in the world are here. And that alone makes the Tongass a treasure on a world scale. But there are other things as well. Where else on the North American continent can we go and find that everything that has ever been known to live there is still there? That's the truth of the matter in the Tongass National Forest.
The Tongass covers most of southeast Alaska's Inside Passage. It's 500 miles long from Ketchikan to Yakutat and 100 miles wide from Sitka to Juneau. The Tongass includes 2 ice fields covering some 4,500 square miles, 2 national monuments, 19 wilderness areas, 2,000 islands, and 11,000 miles of shoreline. At 17 million acres, the Tongass is America's largest national forest, and 1/3 of it is managed as wilderness.
These old mossy forests here in the Tongass are kind of a paradoxical mix. Sometimes you experience the most extraordinary silence. Then at other times, these forests make a kind of gallery for sound. The beautiful thing about the mix of sound and silence in these forests is the effect that it has on you as a person. It's as if you're absorbing the peace and beauty of the place. It's called the Tongass National Forest. And of course it does have this great ancient forest of trees, but in fact a lot of the Tongass isn't covered with trees at all. Moving around here in the Tongass is a constant reminder of our own ephemerality. We live in oftentimes an obliviousness to the idea of time. And we can come out in the forest and we can move through a place where trees are 500 or 600 or 1,000 years old. Then we go out of the forest and into the fjords. Maybe those rocks are unfathomably old, just beyond my comprehension old. But I can think that I myself am part of a stream of life that goes on for a very long time. And maybe that gives me a different sense of my place and what I can give back to this world that gives so much to me in the way of beauty and richness and sustains my body and my soul. Perhaps rather than focusing on what I take from the world, maybe I should think about what I give back to it.
One of the animals of the Tongass that gives back in a big way is the salmon. Richard Nelson calls them a miracle animal. When they spawn and die in Tongass streams and rivers, their bodies fertilize the water for future generations. Salmon carcasses are also carried into the forest by animals like eagles and bears. Their decaying remains then provide nutrients to the soil.
As it turns out, then those nutrients get drawn up into the trees. So you can find nutrients that come from the bodies of salmon that were acquired someplace 1,000, 2,000 miles out in the ocean in the tops of these trees. And the trees themselves then are critical to nurture the streams in which the salmon grow. So here's this fish that teaches us how ecology works, that teaches us how life works, that shows us that one living thing is never separate from all other living things. It might seem a little bit odd to say this, but one of the great things about the Tongass National Forest is that you're not alone at the top of the food chain. And anywhere you go in the Tongass, there's likely to be an animal that's a lot bigger and a lot stronger and a lot more intimidating than you are. The presence of bears here is a reminder to us that we're not necessarily in charge. And it gives us that vital sense that this is a wild place. And that, I think, tells us perhaps more vividly than anything else what an extraordinary place this is. That we don't have to move through a land left lonely by the disappearance of the great animals, the grizzly bear, the black bear, the moose, the mountain goats. They're not gone. They're still here. They're everywhere around us. We're able here in the Tongass National Forest to touch the American earth as it has always been. There are very few places, any place, in America or elsewhere in the world where we can do that. We can move through not only with that sense of everything's here that should be, but with that sense of elation that here we as humans can share a living community with everything, that whatever the great designer of this world intended is still here.
The living community that is the Tongass National Forest has produced remarkable reactions in many who have experienced it firsthand, two of whom are Richard Nelson and John Muir. My favorite John Muir quote comes from his book, My First Summer in the Sierra. Between every two pine trees is a doorway leading to a new way of life. I've found life to be full of doorways. Some are framed by spruce and hemlock rather than pines, and some aren't framed by trees at all. For me, the mountain slopes on either side of the Inside Passage framed my doorway to the Tongass and a new way of life. For the Tongass National Forest, I'm Pete Griffin. This is just a small corner of the Tongass National Forest, a forest that covers most of southeast Alaska. Thankfully, it's still a largely intact and functioning ecosystem with abundant fish and wildlife. Aldo Leopold, the father of modern wildlife management, said, "To keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering." Now, managing a national forest isn't exactly tinkering, but we are working hard to ensure that we maintain good habitat for all the cogs and wheels, including the remarkable species of fish and wildlife that live on the Tongass.
The Tongass is one of the most unique places in the world. When I think about the Tongass and think about fish and wildlife in the Tongass, it's that connection between the ocean and the forests and the rivers that connect those together that really drive what we have up here that's a very unique ecosystem. It's unique in the world. Being near the ocean, it is a relatively moderate, temperate climate, which in turn drives this very abundant system. And we have lush vegetation. That vegetation is what creates the habitat for the many species that we have.
As the Forest Service's district ranger in Yakutat, Tricia O'Connor has been responsible for fish and wildlife habitat. While she has a master's degree in resource management and wildlife, her connection to Alaska is as much genetic as it is academic. Her grandfather worked as a wildlife biologist when Alaska was still a territory in the 1940s, and her father was a star basketball player in Juneau.
One of my first experiences when I moved up here, I do fly fish, but I'm not that great. And I really wanted to learn how to catch a salmon on my fly rod, and I had tried quite a bit, but came down in the fall one evening, right before sunset. It was the type of evening where it didn't matter what I did with my fly rod, I could catch a coho salmon every cast. And the first fish that I'd ever caught on my fly rod, my first salmon, as I pulled it in, a group of trumpeter swans flew over my head. And that was the moment I said, this is such a special place.
The Tongass is a special place to many others as well. Most who live here, or those who visit, are impressed by the abundance of fish and wildlife.
We do not have a listed threatened or endangered species that inhabits the uplands of the Tongass. That, to me, that's a very telling story. That doesn't mean we don't have to be careful about what we do out there, though.
Being careful means preserving existing fish and wildlife habitat, and in some cases, reclaiming it. Like the others working for the Forest Service on the Tongass, Tricia has been involved in both.
We have, in the past, done quite a bit of things on the land that while were good for one thing, may not have been the best thing for fish and wildlife. And so our charge now is, and we're very serious about this, is looking at past effects of things like clear cuts, roads we put in, whether they were logging roads, roads for oil exploration, recreation roads, and making sure and ensuring that those features on the land are not having negative impacts on fish and wildlife.
Restoration of habitat is taking place all across the Tongass. There are several examples in Tricia's Yakutat area.
Well, we're standing on a logging road, and logging roads do affect fish and wildlife habitat, and in this case they're affecting stream flow and how water gets to streams.
The restoration in this case involved using heavy equipment to rough up a section of an old logging road. The result, in just 2 years, was a return to natural vegetation. A poorly designed road built years ago is causing a different kind of habitat problem.
What we're seeing behind us here is an old road that was put in during the early 60s for oil exploration. It may look like a stream to you, but it's actually an old roadbed. The water has been diverted down the old roadbed and is taking away from high-quality fisheries habitat. So we are in the midst of doing a project that would help restore those stream connections. Even though it might seem like a small project, it's one piece of the big picture of making sure that we have lots of salmon habitat forever.
Yet another Yakutat restoration project came about because of the widespread use of off-road vehicles.
And what's happened in the past is there's been quite a bit of unregulated use, and people were able to drive wherever they wanted to and would drive through muskegs and through wetlands crossing streams.
Through community cooperation, limits have been placed on where off-road vehicles may be operated. In addition, a short demonstration project used different materials to determine which would be best for future ATV trails. Other kinds of habitat protection have also taken place in Yakutat.
In areas where there are stream crossings, we have actually gone in and put bridges, put crossings so that the public can cross safely and easily, and then the fish habitat is not degraded by their continued crossing.
Improving fish habitat is just one kind of restoration taking place on the Tongass. In Sitka, studies are being conducted on ways to improve tree growth after logging.
We even age harvested this unit. The stems come back at such a great density and they grow so quickly that all the canopies interlock together and exclude the light from coming down to the forest floor. You can see on the ground that there's very little vegetation. It's not much of a grocery store. We take out many of the trees that are left in the stand, we thin them out, and then the canopy will allow more light to the forest floor, and the result is more robust forest floor vegetation, which is your grocery store for the deer. We have 435,000 acres of harvested land on the Tongass. We've already thinned about a third of those acres to date, and we continue to have an aggressive thinning program.
Although the Forest Service manages the land on the Tongass, that's only part of the habitat story. The fish and wildlife themselves are managed by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. The two agencies work closely together. One example is at Pat Creek, a popular brown bear viewing area on Admiralty, an island famous for its bears. Today, Pat Creek is a 60,000-acre wildlife sanctuary where hunting is prohibited and bears are protected. Because of its popularity, viewing permits are required during summer months. Both Fish and Game and Forest Service employees are at the site throughout the summer to answer visitors' questions and prevent conflicts between people and bears.
Most visitors to Alaska, the thing they want to see most often is a bear. And so having a place where there is a large abundance of bears and bears come into places where people can see them and see them easily really is a world-class resource. One of the ways to keep people interested in conservation and stewardship is knowing that they have some personal tie with the land and the resources out there. And wildlife really helps build that bridge. It's one piece of that connection with the natural world that I really think helps us as humanity maintain our connection with the natural world, and that is just so important for us to sustain what we have in the long run.
Another example of cooperation between the Federal Forest Service and the State Department of Fish and Game involves salmon.
We count sockeye, we count coho, chum and pinks through the weir at least 3 or 4 times a day, and all that data goes to Fish and Game, so they can get an accumulative number of how many fish are returning every year. Because I know that the information that we're getting out here is going to really allow the salmon fishery to be healthy and sustainable, and to allow the Fish and Game to come up with a reasonable cutoff point, say, you know, this is how many you can catch, this is where the cutoff is, this is when you need to stop fishing.
Seeing wildlife is one of the top reasons visitors give for choosing trips to Southeast Alaska. But Fish and Wildlife in the Tongass provide more than just zoos without bars. They provide jobs and food for year-round residents. The Seatuck River near Yakutat is just one example.
The same fish that sport fishermen upstream are fly fishing for, the same fish that the bears are eating, at the lower end of the Seatuck River, we have both commercial fishermen making a living off of that and subsistence fishermen who are feeding their families from the same resource. The community of Yakutat has a very strong tie with that river because it provides so much for them in not only food but also sustenance and a living. The Tongass, I believe, really is a national treasure. And a lot of it comes from having this world-class abundance, sheer abundance of wildlife and fish, that not only can people come up here and see it in a beautiful setting, but they also have the ability, and we still have the ability, to use fish and wildlife and do it in a way that's sustainable.
As a teenager growing up in Michigan, I recall seeing a bald eagle for the very first time. It was circling in the sunlight against a gray October sky over northern Lake Huron. I was absolutely thrilled. Wildlife is sometimes taken for granted by those of us now living in southeast Alaska because it seems we have so much. But healthy wildlife populations require good habitat. As managers of the land that comprises most of that habitat, it's a responsibility we take very seriously. For the Tongass National Forest, I'm Pete Griffin. The dominant natural feature of the Tongass National Forest is trees. This is, after all, America's largest national forest, but a surprisingly important part of the forest is less visible, beneath the surface. These old pilings are just some of the above-ground remains of a vast network of underground gold mines that established the towns of Juneau and Douglas in the late 1800s. Go to Prince of Wales Island and you'll find hundreds of caves. In other parts of the Tongass, remnants of old volcanoes are visible, and current hot springs are still heated by the Earth's core. The complex geology of the Tongass has resulted in a wild array of features, including gold ore, but many of these features are hidden beneath the Tongass.
This cave is the largest known cave in Alaska. It's one of the longest known caves in Alaska.
El Capitan Cave on Prince of Wales Island has been opened to the public by the Forest Service, which manages caves on the Tongass National Forest. El Cap is just one of hundreds of caves already discovered. Jim Bachtel knows Alaska's caves. He's the geologist for the Tongass with responsibilities for Karsten Cave management. Bachtel is from Washington, and he grew up in the shadow of Mount St. Helens.
Fascination with Alaska. I grew up listening to stories from my grandfather in the years that he spent up here, and I always wanted to come, and the opportunity came along, and I grabbed it.
Once in Alaska, Bachtel grabbed onto the geologic history of southeast Alaska. It's a history that shows the importance of Earth forces in creating surface features that are important today. And it's a history that began millions of years ago.
We're at the end of the plate tectonic conveyor belt. 10 to 11 pieces of continents which no longer exist came rafted in on plates. So these small fragments of continent have just been stacked up along our outer shores.
Plate tectonics created the southeast Alaska we see today, but of course there have been other significant forces at play.
The largest modification that's happened on the landscape over the last 2 million years is multiple glacial advances. So those boundaries between the terrains and the major fault lines as a result of how Southeast was assembled is what the ice worked on to build our fjords and our straits and our channels. It's been suggested that magma moved up along those fractures right after the ice started to pull back in Southeast Alaska, creating a series of volcanic eruptions, such as Mount Edgecombe and the Mount Edgecombe volcanic field. We also see other volcanic cones and events, such as New Eddystone Rock, which is the core of an old volcano. The same fracture systems that allowed the magma to come up to spread out volcanism throughout Southeast Alaska probably is allowing groundwater to get down to depth to come up as these hot springs.
Geology and mining have also played a pivotal role in the history of Southeast Alaska and its economy. By the late 1800s, gold discoveries had attracted many. In Juneau, the Alaska Juneau gold mine prospered for over half a century before closing in the 1940s. Mining remains an important industry beneath the Tongass to this day. Mining operations on the Tongass continue to contribute to employment and to the economies of the state and many communities. For example, the Kennecott Greens Creek mine is one of the largest silver producers in North America and the top producer of zinc from National Forest System lands. This underground mine is located on the northern end of Admiralty Island National Monument. It's unique in that it operates within a national monument, but on a very small footprint of just 320 acres. In addition to gold, silver, and zinc, other valuable minerals under the Tongass include platinum, molybdenum, copper, lead, uranium, iron, marble, and limestone. Southeast Alaska's complex geology includes large karst landscapes. They're formed in underground limestone deposits that have been dissolved by acidic water seeping through from the surface.
There's two ways that water gets into the karst system. One by a major stream that flows directly into a cave entrance. And the second is through all the fractures that underlie the forest. And that's why the forest is what we refer to as well-drained.
These well-drained karst areas are among the most productive in the Tongass. Trees grow larger and faster because their roots hold better in the rock fissures and because of the good drainage provided by fractured limestone. Acidic muskeg water that seeps through limestone caves emerges with a higher pH. This nutrient-rich and buffered water results in more algae in the streams for fish and large productive clam beds near beaches. Increasingly, the karst areas are recognized for their caves, particularly on Prince of Wales Island.
We have inventoried only a small portion of Southeast Alaska. We know of about 700 caves right now across the Tongass. We find 20 to 30 new caves a year.
The Forest Service and experienced spelunkers have carefully explored and mapped Tongass caves. They have made discoveries that change fundamental understandings of early Southeast Alaska.
In 1990, when we first started seriously working in the caves, it was thought that, and reported and written in many places, that glacial ice covered all of Southeast Alaska to the edge of the continental margin, 3,000 feet thick, and nothing existed here and nothing lived here. Up the small side passage here, some 400 feet inside the cave, are the claw marks of a bear in the mud of this passage. There's no way of knowing how long these claw marks have been here, but the stable environment inside the cave may have preserved them for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. We started realizing that there were places that animals survived through the last ice age. So if the animals could survive out there, that there were corridors out there that people could have moved through that were unglaciated.
These discoveries challenged the theory that the only way for the first people to enter North America was over the Bering Land Bridge and through an interior corridor between melting ice sheets.
The concept of coastal migration that was proposed long ago by Knut Fladmark was strengthened by the discoveries here in southeast Alaska from inside the caves. The oldest artifact that we found inside the cave that is unquestionably of human origin is a flaking tool that's 10,300 years old. And then there were the human remains that was found on a cave here in northern Prince of Wales Island that dated to 9,700 years old.
The discoveries already made in southeast Alaska caves have been significant. No one knows how many caves are yet to be found and what other surprises they may reveal.
What's it look like from there?
It's a steep, narrow pit that drops down about 20 feet from up here.
We've now cataloged over 50,000 bones from 13 different caves across the Tongass that span way beyond the dating capability of carbon-14, which is 45,000 years and younger is its ability. And it's painted a completely different picture of life on the Tongass over the last 50,000 years.
So whether it's caves, hot springs, volcanoes, or gold mines, there's a lot more to the Tongass than meets the eye. So when you're using your cell phone with its gold-printed circuits, or you hear a new theory as to how the first people came to North America, remember, there's a connection with what's beneath the Tongass. For the Tongass National Forest, I'm Pete Griffin. Ah, a scallop. Scallops are probably best known for their beautiful shell, found in the works of Renaissance artists Botticelli and Titian. But one shell that you won't find on southeast Alaska beaches is an oyster shell. But oysters are becoming an important part of the economy for some towns in southeast Alaska, towns whose timber-based economies were devastated with the closure of the pulp mills. Hi, I'm Pete Griffin. Let's talk about oysters and logging on the Tongass National Forest. For years, logging provided the economic bedrock for many southeast communities. Nockety is an example. It's a small town on the northwest side of Prince of Wales Island.
If you want to go anywhere outside of this area, you come through here, regardless of whether you want fuel, you want to move a dump truck to an island, or you want to move people, because all of them have to go through Nockety. So we set it up, and this is what we have.
Mall? Well, no, there's no mall. I'd say the store is a focal point of the community. Everybody seems to be in and out of there quite often. The post office is in the store too, so everybody gets their mail there also, and that's probably the hub, all right.
The people that are here at Nockety, it just amazes you. The entrepreneurs are probably, I'm going to say, the biggest factor of people, and that's the ones that say, listen, I know I can go up there and I can do this or that, and but they're all, the majority of them are all looking for the one thing, and that's the lifestyle. That's first, of course, right very closely would be making a living.
Nockety began as a logging camp. When the logging company left in 2000, so did 25% of the local population. Marvin Peterson was one of those who lost his job.
You'd think just nothing but a ghost town, because of no economy and few fishermen out, but they're not based right here. There's no facilities right here for fishermen. And no logging, there was just no industry.
Even with the loss of forest jobs, however, many Nockety residents wanted to stay. A state land lottery helped by attracting newcomers who wanted to build. State grants helped fund a road connecting the homes. The state also built a new school. And some small logging operations continued to provide local jobs. But residents of the community of fewer than 200 realized they needed a steady source of revenue.
What we have here on the north end, and specifically here in Nockety, is sea otter sound. And sea otter sound is abundant in all kinds of resources with logging, but the hunting and fishing and the shellfish is the aquaculture industry is what we're basing our hopes and dreams on.
Few individuals got to thinking that there's got to be some other way to start something. So come up with oysters.
Well, they're still growing pretty fast, Art.
Yeah, they are.
A lot faster than I expected.
Art is Art King. Like others in town, he and his wife Claire diversify their work. They rent a few small cabins and run the local laundry. Art King had a business career before moving to Nockety. He put that into practice when the then president of the Homeowners Association asked him to look into establishing a community-owned oyster nursery.
Had a few, and now more, oyster farmers in the area. And they had a very, very difficult time getting spat or getting quality spat.
That's where Nockety saw an opportunity. A state grant paid for the construction of an oyster nursery, but they had to look elsewhere for money to buy the spat, the larval stage of oysters.
The Forest Service came through with their economic development people, Sandy Frost in particular and George Doyle. So we got our spat and we started raising spat. And we didn't know much about what we were doing, but we were studying and learning.
The Nockety nursery buys the spat, each about the size of a grain of rice, and raises them in bins. A powerful paddle wheel circulates water through the bins. The water carries natural nutrients that feed the young oysters. After 2 years, the oysters are sold to Alaska oyster farmers.
He's getting 2 years of labor knocked off of his costs, plus he's getting his return on his investment 2 years sooner. So this helps him, and then it helps us too. So we all benefit. The community has money to operate now.
And it's more money than in the past, 5 times what Nockety had received under the old state revenue sharing plan.
The community only had revenue sharing of about $3,600 a year coming in. They now have $20,000 so far this year.
Art and Bob worked to make the oysters more appealing to the farmer and ultimately the consumer. One way is to shape the shells.
This is the size oysters that the farmers really like to get. And what we're doing is shaping these so that this up and down here is a deeper cup, which produces more meat. And the way we do that is to knock this edge off that you see here. See how that comes off? When we rinse these oysters, we knock that edge off. And what happens then is this oyster gets deeper. That oyster will slowly grow out to this size and slowly give more cup too, and makes a good-looking oyster on the plate.
Nockety residents believe their oyster nursery will provide an economic base for their future by meeting an increasing demand for seafood from the cold, clean waters of southeast Alaska.
It's going to give the community a base and no need for taxes because we're an independent community with our own industry, actually.
I think it's going to be great. It's going to build. There's more land coming up for sale.
We probably are going to have something that you could call substantial, probably within the next 5 to 7 years.
I look for Naki and this area in the southeast to really be big in the aquaculture business. We have very pristine waters. All of the indicators I see is that we're just going to grow, grow, grow.
Now, the Nocatee projects won't apply to every community, but they do show how people with an idea and the determination to carry it out can help improve their town's economy. For the Tongass National Forest, I'm Pete Griffin. People living in southeast Alaska are surrounded by wood. The 17 million acre Tongass National Forest covers most of the land in this part of the state. And you don't have to have lived here very long to be aware of the past controversies regarding Tongass timber. 50-year timber sale contracts, extensive clear cutting, export of wood overseas. But the timber program on the Tongass has changed. This house is an example of the new timber industry. The wood is from trees cut on a small timber sale, sawn and dried at a local family-owned mill, with the final product used right here in southeast Alaska.
Secondary manufacturing and value added. That's, to me, that's the wave of the future as far as the forest goes here.
Wes Tyler has seen the changes in Tongass National Forest logging practices during a career in the industry. He moved to southeast Alaska in the late 1960s to work in the woods. In the early 80s, he was with Whitestone Logging in Hoonah. When the company announced it was moving, Wes and his wife Sue decided to stay, bought the company's mill, and started Icy Straits Lumber. Today, they and like-minded operators are the future of logging in the Tongass, by adding value to the wood they cut.
Dimensional wood for their framing package, to floor joists and floor decking and wall framing, and then also interior paneling and outside siding. Pretty much everything wood you can do in a house, we can do.
The Icy Straits lumber facilities include shops, dry storage and air drying buildings, a dry kiln, the sawmill, a sort yard, and more. They employ about a dozen workers. The timber comes from their successful bid for a small Forest Service timber sale near Hoonah. Their size and scale is far different from the large 50-year timber sale contracts that began in the 1950s and created controversies in the Tongass.
We don't need a lot of volume to make this work. It's just pretty minute compared to what was going on. Plus, we're taking the more average trees and actually making something out of them, and most of the time they were cut up for pulp.
In the early days, virtually all of the wood cut in Southeast was sent out either as pulp or undried green lumber. Today, Wes Tyler and other Southeast Alaska mills add value to the trees they cut.
make it into boards, there's some value there. Then we air dry it, or we kiln dry it. And we've added more value because we had a dry board. And then we take it to the molder or the planers, either one, and make it into final product.
That final product might be dimensional materials like 2x4s, 2x6s, or wider boards. They also make tongue and groove paneling and siding. And they custom cut to size and shape. That's a benefit to people like Lynn Schooler of Juneau, who used Icy Straits lumber when he built his new home.
Probably the best thing is the personal contact. You can call him or Susan up on the phone and talk to them about exactly what it is you want. They understand, and when you get it, it's what you asked for.
Not surprisingly, Hoona residents are using Icy Straits lumber when building their homes, but West Tyler markets throughout northern Southeast.
Well, I've used it pretty much extensively inside and out. For example, all the siding, the exterior siding is all native hemlock from Hoona area. I've used my deck railing is all yellow cedar. I've got quite a bit of flooring and roofing hemlock inside the house. What I like about Wes on the pure business end is he will make a product for me to my dimension, to my size. Price-wise, he's been more than competitive.
West Tyler does more than provide wood for homes. The Forest Service, for example, used Icy Straits lumber for its new district office building in Juneau. The Forest Service used a contract incentive to incorporate as much locally produced lumber as possible in the project. A good example of using local timber for local projects. The Alaska Division of Parks has worked with volunteers from the Territorial Sportsmen to build public use cabins in the Juneau area. This one is in Taku Harbor.
We've been building our cabins using the materials from Icy Straits lumber. They have come up with a cabin kit. This particular cabin is all red cedar. The first two that we built were hemp fir, typical common logs. This one is red cedar, which is a little bit unusual. They wanted to do a prototype to see how it worked out, and we love it. This one has turned out beautifully.
In order for Alaska wood to be used for construction in cabins, homes, or any other structure, it must meet established and recognized quality control standards. The Ketchikan Wood Technology Center is a nonprofit applied research facility supporting the Alaska wood products industry.
What we're doing is we're testing our species, and we're finding out that the Alaska material is stronger than it was previously believed to be. If we can show that it's stronger, that positions it better in the marketplace, and it makes our wood more attractive on the market. Well, for instance, for an engineer or an architect to design a house, they need to know how strong the floor beams are. So we'll do bending tests and actually break a large number of pieces and develop a statistical database so that we can predict what the strength of an average board is. We'd do tension testing on boards where we actually grab them and pull them apart from end to end to establish the tensile strength. We do machining properties so that we can help an industry who may be in furniture to know what knife angle to use in order to turn the product.
What we've done is made a blade that allows us to cut the wood to this profile, which significantly increases the value.
In addition to conducting some of the first tests ever on Alaska trees, the Ketchikan Wood Technology Center also helps Alaskans develop products, understand markets, and select, install, and operate new equipment. The goal is to help the timber industry adapt and prosper.
We have the capability to do more with every tree that's harvested now. We use more of each tree. We have products that will take advantage of the entire tree, and not just the harvestable trees are what were currently thought as harvestable, but those trees that were before thought to be culls. think that the best days of the forest products industry can be in front of us if we take hold of this technology and market our products effectively from a position of knowledge where we understand the product and we understand what markets it can go into. I think our best days are in front of us.
Wes and Sue Tyler have invested in the future of the Alaska timber industry. For them, that means more than custom cutting wood for Alaska consumers. It also means finding value from byproducts that, in the past, would have just been thrown away.
It's energy that's sitting there to be used. Instead of using and burning diesel fuel, which we had to do to begin with the dry kiln, why now we can burn sawdust instead.
Another way of adding value is developing new products. Wes Tyler is making them out of what would otherwise be scraps.
We're able to maximize things right down to, printing her down to a 4x4. We do small clocks and little paperweights and pictures. You can engrave a picture on a piece of wood, and these little sayings that you have hanging on the wall, home sweet home, and things like that.
The finished products are then sold at Icy Strait Point, a restored cannery in Hoona. The historic building includes local shops for cruise ship visitors.
That's a nice looking fish.
Wes Tyler's value-added philosophy and business practice fit the Forest Service's long-range plan for timber harvesting in the Tongass: small sales, local milling, added value, and the use of the final product by local residents.
I like to see every part of the tree used. I mean, it's there, and we might as well make the most of it if we can. And it makes things go farther, and I believe it's just good for our forest and for the economy around here.
That's a philosophy shared not only by Wes Tyler and the Forest Service, but by wood product consumers as well.
Well, I was always opposed to the pulp mill contracts. I thought that was a lousy use of our resources, and I always said that I would fully support any sort of local value-added timber industry that anybody wanted to undertake. And so when it came time to build this house, it was time to put my money where my mouth is. And so far, I've been glad I did that.
Whether you're a consumer of wood products from the Tongass or you just enjoy being in the woods, there are significant changes taking place in the way we manage timber. And as a result, this remarkable temperate rainforest, this green mantle draped across southeast Alaska, will be here for a long time to come. For the Tongass National Forest, I'm Pete Griffin. More than 1 million people a year visit southeast Alaska. Most of them arrive by cruise ship and visit attractions in many of our coastal communities. In Juneau, the most popular attraction is the Mendenhall Glacier, but people also visit the Tongass National Forest for the wilderness, the wildlife, the recreation, and to experience the unique Alaskan lifestyle. But wherever the location and whatever the attraction, visitors seem to want to get close to nature. They want to get closer to the Alaska of their dreams. At nearly 17 million acres, the Tongass is America's largest national forest. Congress has designated nearly 6 million acres, more than a third of the Tongass, to be managed by the Forest Service as wilderness. It's that wilderness and much more that attracts so many visitors to the Tongass each year. There are differences that set the Tongass apart as a visitor destination. For example, much of this national forest is real wilderness that requires real safety skills and local knowledge to enjoy safely. Another difference for Tongass visitors is the difficulty of access. While many national forests have extensive road systems, the Tongass has few. As a result, visitors here frequently rely on others to provide transportation.
We'll start today by going in Ketchikan. We're going to head down Tongass Narrows and up Beam Canal into the Misty Fjord National Monument.
The result of real wilderness dangers, lack of easy access, and reliance on others to provide transportation or guiding services to Tongass attractions has created a thriving tourism industry throughout Southeast Alaska. They range from tour ships run by large corporations to small family-sized companies. Brenda Schwartz, a third-generation Alaskan, is one of many involved in tourism in Southeast Alaska. She was born in Wrangell, a historic community of 2,000 at the mouth of the Stikine River, and raised in a commercial fishing family. Like many small-town residents, Brenda has several jobs.
I paint like coastal watercolor scenery, and most of that blends into lots of other coastal watercolor art. I'm probably best known for the fact that I paint on navigational charts.
Brenda also owns a Wrangell company that offers small group tours in jet boats, boats she describes as a cross between a tank and a Porsche. Brenda is not just the company owner. She's also a skipper and a guide. One of her most popular trips is cruising the Stikine River.
In the Tlingit language, the Stikine means the Great River. It's a significant body of water. It's North America's fastest free-flowing navigable river, draining 20,000 square miles of land.
Depending on what her guests want to see, each trip up the Stikine has its own character. Her goal is to deliver a wilderness experience.
I try to take people there in small, kind of intimate groups and put them in touch with something real authentic, some real Alaska.
One part of the real Alaska Brenda takes visitors to on the Stikine is the Chief Shakes Glacier.
In a jet boat, you can navigate the stream at most river levels up and enter the lake through a narrow entrance and play around in the icebergs and view the face of the glacier.
The Chief Shakes Hot Springs is another of Brenda's popular river tour stops. The Forest Service maintains the public facilities.
They are just natural gravity-fed hot water coming down PVC pipe that comes from a little hot water spring that comes out of the side of the mountain. And you can sit there and enjoy a beautiful scenery in a wonderful wilderness setting. It's a must-do on the Stikine River.
Brenda also takes visitors to Annan Creek, about 35 miles south of Wrangell. This famous bear viewing area is managed by the Forest Service.
What we do, a couple basic things on the trail is, one, we make noise so the bears know we're coming, so that we don't appear as a threat if we come into their space before they're prepared for it.
Annan Creek historically is one of Southeast Alaska's largest pink salmon returns. The structure of the creek has a couple of waterfalls that kind of pool up the fish. There's even a little developed deck and boardwalk area that was put together by the Forest Service to make it easier to watch bears. It's highly regulated and restricted. You have to have a permit, or basically like a reservation, to go there.
Brenda Schwartz has one of many businesses catering to summertime visitors. She is specialized in attractions in the Tongass National Forest that are close to Wrangell.
It's a wilderness area, and that's why it has stayed the way it is because it's part of the Tongass National Forest. So through Forest Service regulation, which some people balk at, but it's what's keeping it the way it is. Hopefully the way it'll keep it that way. So 100 years from now, when, you know, my children's children are going there, I hope it looks the same way it does to us today.
Whether it's jet boating on the Stikine River or watching bears at Annan Creek or enjoying the Mendenhall Glacier, there's no shortage of attractions on the Tongass National Forest. As land managers, we understand the importance of tourism to the economy of Southeast Alaska. But when a visitor says to me, "You get to work in a place like this," I understand just how important it is we manage this land for future generations to enjoy. For the Tongass National Forest, I'm Pete Griffin. The Tongass National Forest is part of the world's largest temperate rainforest. No surprise, then, that it rains here a lot. Nor is it a surprise that some folks choose not to live in this climate. But those of us who do live here and work for the Forest Service have some remarkable professional opportunities in a land of damp but magnificent landscapes.
Alaska has that lure and has that mystique.
I've worked on lots of places down south, and every place I've worked has just been spectacular and unique, but the Tongass is by far my most favorite place. Alaska has just so much to offer. It's still wild. It's still just fascinating to me to come to a place like this that is untamed and untouched.
What's exciting about working on the Tongass is the fact that you can take the good habitat and make it excellent.
There's just a real ethic of conservation and land stewardship.
I think it offers more diversity than any other national forest in the system. And not to mention, you get to live in Alaska.
The Tongass National Forest covers southeast Alaska's Inside Passage. At 17 million acres, it's about the same combined size as the states of Maryland, Delaware, and Hawaii. 70,000 people live in some 30 communities surrounded by the Tongass. They range in size from small villages to towns of several thousand. The largest town is Juneau, the state capital, with 30,000 people. America's largest national forest offers unparalleled opportunities for people looking for jobs managing public lands on a grand scale.
First of all, coming to the Tongass has got unparalleled wildlife, fish, watershed characteristics. This is a place that is relatively intact, much more intact than any other place in the country. And just working on the vast landscape that we have that is in this condition is extremely exciting and rewarding.
We are a forest that a lot of people in the United States care very deeply about. And because of that, we are often in the limelight. I have spent many hours back in Washington, D.C. talking to people who really care about the Tongass. A lot of places in the Forest Service you would go to, people in my position wouldn't have that opportunity.
I think you would get more experience here quicker than you would anywhere else.
When I was younger, I thought I was going to be a professional dancer, a professional ballet dancer, and it didn't work out. But through it all, I always had a love of geology as a hobby, and that did work out. My position currently is something called a student career employment position, which means that the Forest Service pays for my training, they pay for my graduate education, and then when I graduate, I work for them for 2 years.
We're here to talk to people about bear safety and make sure they have the information that they need to be safe here. And we do wildlife monitoring sessions of the bears that are here, and kind of people management and bear management.
It's exciting to be a part of a long-term project and something that is really involved in a management aspect of conservation. So the results that we're going to get here will have a big impact for managing this forest, this ecosystem.
For me, it's just the variety of things that I get to do. You know, one week I might be out with Jim mapping geology. Another week, you know, assisting on an archaeological excavation. The week after that, I'm exploring new caves that no one's ever been in before. And, it's just going in Monday morning and not knowing where you're going to be Friday afternoon. That's really exciting for me.
I came from California mostly because I've always wanted to be in Alaska and work in Alaska, and I like kind of the Forest Service philosophy of land stewardship. I'm a soil scientist, so I do like to dig. So it's just a good time getting out and getting dirty in the woods.
The purpose of the Southeast Alaska Discovery Center is to educate people about the Tongass and about Alaska's public lands. Well, of course, being Alaska Native, I get the people that are interested in Native culture, all the staff send them to me. And just the other day I had a professor and his wife was saying that he's an instructor. He said, no, right now I'm a student. So he was learning from me and I was learning from him.
There's some cultural dimensions, some cultural history that's real today, that's a part of this forest in terms of subsistence and the resources that they provide the native people, the indigenous people of this area, that to me can't be separated from being a biologist or a scientist studying the biology here.
Another challenge on the district is timber management. Some time ago, there were large timber sale contracts for 50 years. After those were canceled, a lot of the industry went away, and the industry that remained, we hope to be able to form a stable industry that could work at a lower level than in the past. Coming up with the timber for those mills has been challenging, not because the supply isn't out there, but for controversy over the Tongass. Some people really want it to stay the way it is because it's so wonderful and undeveloped. And on the other hand, that lack of development makes it hard to make a living.
It is not just a timber forest. It has that piece, but it's got a lot more. Recreation is a growing industry in this southeast economy. These small islands, which at one time were entirely timber dependent, are diversifying their economies and are very interested in everything else the Tongass has to offer.
It is one of the most challenging jobs I've ever done, is trying to hire people for this position and trying to tell them about the conditions up here. You gotta paint the worst picture possible, because you don't want someone to come up here, you know, and paint this rosy picture, then have them spend a week in the rain.
We don't have many roads in the Tongass that connect to other areas, and you can't just jump in a car and head off to visit grandparents or parents.
Coming from outside, I mean, stateside would be obviously a culture shock.
You know, I mean, we're a small town, like 600-800 people. We've had people in the past come from like Louisiana and didn't know what they're coming to. But by the end of the summer, they had a good time. They really enjoyed Huna.
There's lots of reasons to come to Southeast Alaska and the Tongass National Forest. It's a magnificent place. It's beautiful. It's full of wildlife and scenery and fishing. It's a great place to work. The temperatures and weather here year-round are fairly mild. It's a good place to live.
Well, I spend the summer out here in Misty Fjords from May through late September. There are 4 rangers covering a wilderness area about the size of Connecticut. It's a great job. I love it. This is my 3rd season here. This is my office.
Whenever I meet people from the lower 48 who learn that I live and work in Alaska, most say, "I've always dreamed of visiting Alaska," or "I've always thought about applying for a job in Alaska." And many seem just a bit envious that I'm here while they haven't yet taken steps to make their dreams come true. For the Tongass National Forest, I'm Pete Griffin. That is one sour berry. That flavor and smell bring back memories from my childhood. Highbush cranberries are just one of many foods growing on the Tongass National Forest. Picking them and other berries is a very old tradition. People have depended on the forest for food for as long as people have lived in Southeast Alaska. Today, some, like me, gather food for recreation. But for many Southeast Alaska residents, the Tongass and its waters represent their grocery store. For them, gathering subsistence foods is a necessity and a way of life.
We call it subsistence, but for our people it was a way of life. Early on in the season, we'll fish for king salmon, put that up for the winter months. Now we're fishing for sockeye. Our people will go out and gather halibut. We'll hunt deer. In the summer months, we'll gather blueberries, huckleberries, salmon berries. Our elders would say that the lifestyle that we have and the food that we eat was more healthier than what we buy nowadays in the store.
Too hard, going over the cork. Easy.
Subsistence fishing and hunting provide a large share of the food consumed in rural Alaska, an average of 375 pounds per person per year. Nowhere else in the nation is there such a heavy reliance upon wild foods. But Alaska subsistence is more than just gathering food.
Living on the land, living with the land is the fundamental underlying basis of native cultures.
Customary and traditional use is, the Tlingit word for that is akustiye and atuheni, two different things. Our ownership of things and our way of life, you might say. That's customary and traditional use. That's something from the past that was brought up. And that definition was given to subsistence.
The Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, passed by Congress in 1980, mandates that rural residents of Alaska be given a priority for subsistence uses of fish and wildlife. The federal government manages subsistence uses on federal public lands and waters in Alaska, about 60% of the state. The Forest Service is one of the federal agencies working to provide an opportunity for subsistence ways of life by rural Alaskans, both native and non-native.
Basket Bay is one of the places that our people will come and gather their sockeye to put up for the fall and winter months.
Like everyone who lives in southeast Alaska, Donald Frank's community is surrounded by the Tongass National Forest. His Angoon home is the only town on Admiralty Island. Angoon residents who subsistence fish in Basket Bay must travel by boat about 20 miles across Chatham Strait to Chichagof Island.
The type of seine we're using is a beach seine. We have a leaded line and a cork line, and it's about a 45, 50 fathom seine that we use, and we try to hold it out in the tide and wait for the sockeye to move in. When our men tie the seine, they create what's called a sack or a bag, and the fish will hold up in that mill around it as they're closing it, and we'll bring the seine in, both ends in, and start to pull it in and try to close it up before any of the sockeye get out.
Man, 50, 25? How many is that?
36.
36.
There are many streams in southeast Alaska with salmon runs, but there's also a big demand for the fish.
You can never have enough sockeye as a subsistence, in a household or whatever. You just never have enough. Commercial fishermen can never have enough. They're quite a valued resource. It's very fortunate that we do have this little bit of influx of federal subsistence money that allows us to monitor these runs.
One place the monitoring takes place is Basket Bay. That's a location where the Forest Service and Angoon Community Association cooperate on a project to estimate annual escapement.
The purpose is to allow us, the operators, to get an accurate count of the number of sockeye that have escaped the fisheries that make it up to spawn in this lake system.
The Forest Service built the weir and camp, but Angoon residents conduct the on-site monitoring.
What they do is they're here on site 24 hours a day for the whole course of the run. Whenever a sockeye swims upstream and enters the trap at the face of the weir, they'll count the fish out, pass the fish over the weir, and keep a count of how many go up.
We had 5 sockeye adult marked, 1 adult sockeye unmarked, and 3 valuable.
In freshwater on federal lands, federal government has the responsibility for management of subsistence resources, subsistence fisheries. In actuality, we're very closely tied with the state of Alaska Department of Fish and Game, which has, since statehood, obviously been managers of the resource. So we're trying to work together. These projects are cooperative with Fish and Game and the local tribal folks, as is the management.
The federal government has a grant project that goes out. We apply for that as a tribal government, and we get that. That's where the employment comes in of our people, I guess. Also a little training, they're getting interested in also what happens to the resources around them. That's a positive side of this, because we get the information. Whether we get the reports or not, we get the information. People coming in because we are interested in the resources that happen around us.
We don't want this fisheries to disappear. We want it to continue for long term, to continue to be able to come here and gather what we need. Probably most households have somebody that comes out and does this, gather food for their families. We come out here and each one of us sign up for a permit, and we have some elders that can't make it out. We'll bring a permit from the elders, and they're unable to make it here, so we'll take it back and share it with the elders. We'll take our fish home, and we've gotten our smokehouses ready, and people will dry their sockeye, process it. Some of it will be fresh packed in jars. Some will be smoked and dried.
2 or 3.
Now if we cut it, we would cut it straight down and hang it on a pole like this for a day or so till the skin is dried. When we fix fire in the smokehouse, we usually just put a little smoke in there without making it a big fire. If we put a big fire underneath, then it'll cook the meat before and it'll ruin it all. It really helps a lot because we're on low income, fixed income and store prices. We can't depend on the store, so we have to really depend on subsistence. And especially with oil prices now, and it's going to be a tough winter for us. If we didn't have fish to depend on, I don't know how we'd manage.
The economies in rural communities are not adequate to support the economic well-being of people in rural Alaska. So subsistence is really important from an economic perspective to help support the well-being of people. Economic reasons are important, but it's also the cultural reasons that I think that have caused Native people to really work to protect their subsistence.
What we want is healthy watersheds and healthy runs, and I think with that will come healthy fisheries. And so our goal is to maintain subsistence opportunity and harvest as it's occurred in recent years.
Managers of the Tongass National Forest have many responsibilities. Maintaining the environments for the wild foods that people depend on, like highbush cranberry, is one of the more important ones. We recognize the importance of maintaining the subsistence way of life, both for today and for all the tomorrows. For the Tongass National Forest, I'm Pete Griffin. I've been spending time in the woods ever since I was a kid, hunting, fishing, hiking, and I've always wanted to find out more about things. There's a red-breasted sapsucker in the woods up ahead, and I want to find out a little bit more about him. These birds drill rows of small wells on trees. They feed on the sap and small insects that get trapped there. But what I didn't know is that these sap wells are important food sources for other birds, including hummingbirds. Well, I've just learned something new about birds on the Tongass National Forest. These days, researchers are learning new things as well, but they're taking a decidedly more scientific approach.
The muskegs around here, they have a lot of organic acids and fulvic and humic acids because of all the peat, and so these are very low pH waters, which mean they're very acidic, and they're running off these muskegs into the karstlands, and caves are forming. And then downstream, you measure the water there, and the pH has gone up, so it's been buffered. So I'm interested in the chemistry between these two places.
we're definitely interested in tagging some fish. That's what we got this all set up for, and we're waiting for them to come in, and it's not too big of a surprise that they haven't come in yet with the water temperatures being so cold.
We count sockeye, we count coho, chum, and pinks through the weir at least 3 or 4 times a day. All that data goes to Fish and Game, and so they can get an accumulative number of how many fish are returning every year.
Well, we're coming out to pretty much assess the feasibility of the sale, mainly measuring or determining the amount of trees in a certain stand and the quality.
4 is 18.7.
The Tongass offers plenty of room for research. It's the country's largest national forest. In some regards, it's also one of the nation's most controversial because of its history of large-scale logging. Today, as in the past, management of the forest affects the plants and animals. To help ensure the forest remains a healthy, functioning ecosystem, researchers study many details of this complex temperate rainforest. One research project involves an animal that few have ever even seen.
It's a furry animal that looks a lot larger than it is because its fur is fairly dense and fluffy.
I guess the first time I saw it, the thing that came to mind was watching a Batman movie, and you know how you see the Batman flying over the sky? It looks just like that.
It has very large eyes because it's nocturnal. It moves around mostly at night.
This research subject is a small animal that plays a big role in the Tongass National Forest, the northern flying squirrel.
There are very few people that are even aware that we have northern flying squirrels in Southeast Alaska. But when I take a few minutes to explain the importance of the role of this species in forest communities, they realize that understanding the ecology of this species is important for understanding what's going on in the Tongass.
Dr. Winston Smith has been studying flying squirrels in the Tongass for years. He's a research wildlife biologist with the Forest Service's Forestry Sciences Lab. Although based in Juneau, Smith also conducts field work with his flying squirrel research team on Prince of Wales Island.
There's just not that many predators, you know, in terms of that would be preying on northern flying squirrels. Mm-hmm.
The flying squirrel's favored habitat is old-growth forest. One reason they're important to the ecosystem is that they eat fungi and spread spores throughout the forest. These fungi, in turn, improve the ability of tree roots to absorb nutrients and water. The flying squirrel plays another important role. It's an indicator species by which we judge the success of old-growth reserves. This old-growth reserve system is a key component of the Tongass National Forest's wildlife conservation strategy.
The assumption is that if flying squirrels are able to function okay in these old-growth reserves, all of the other wildlife that operate at similar ecological scales or spatial scales are also able to. So the flying squirrel has been selected to represent an entire community of wildlife that use habitat at the same spatial scale. So that's really, to me, the most significant part of the work that we're doing.
The field work begins each morning. The first task, checking each of the 60 baited traps and collecting any captured flying squirrels.
Oh, the door's shut. Maybe we got one, Aaron.
Okay. Oh, I see some
yeah. Yeah, we got one.
Oh, great.
See if we can get this guy to come out.
Okay. It's coming loose there.
Throughout the morning, the field team checks each trap and replaces the bait if necessary. The captured squirrels are taken to a central point for data collection. Hair samples are taken, blood is drawn to get DNA for genetic marking, small radios are attached to the males, and basic information is gathered. All the while, the squirrels are kept hydrated.
She's got the hang of it now.
Yeah.
One more? So how much does it weigh?
220 grams.
200 grams, and it was female. Age?
She's pretty young. I'd say 2.
Really estrus. Great.
Okay, great. Marked animal. This is the patagia of the squirrel. As soon as it jumps from a tree, it spreads its hind and forelimbs, and this catches the air like a kite. And they can maneuver through the forest canopy using their tail as a rudder. And then just before they land, they drop their tail, and their body banks up, and then they usually land really successfully.
After the data is collected, the squirrels are released. They usually run to a nearby tree. The researchers spend afternoons and sometimes evenings tracking the squirrels by the attached radios.
Yeah, it might be in this snag.
Eventually, the squirrel and den are located. Then the researchers gather habitat features such as den height, and tree diameter. Winston Smith estimates there could be as many as a few 100,000 flying squirrels in the Tongass. Although infrequently seen, increased knowledge of their habitat needs is helping land managers make important decisions.
I would like to think that when we're all done with this, that we will have provided not only the Forest Service and the Tongass National Forest, but the people of Southeast Alaska with the science that they need to make the policy decisions to do the best things that we need to do to make sure that these forests are managed in a sustainable way.
Flying squirrels aren't the largest or most famous residents of the rainforest, but research is showing us just how important this animal is to the ecosystem. Research is helping us be better managers of the forest, not only for people, but also for the trees, the animals, and the fish that call this place home. For the Tongass National Forest, I'm Pete Griffin. One remarkable aspect of contemporary life in Southeast Alaska is the rich culture of the Alaska Native people. Archaeological evidence shows that people have lived in Southeast Alaska for over 10,000 years. Because of the indigenous people's ties to the land, Congress has passed laws recognizing the sovereign status of tribal governments. As a result, there's a special relationship between the Alaska Native people and federal agencies, like the Forest Service. On the Tongass National Forest, that special relationship takes the form of partnerships and consultations on a number of projects of mutual interest.
There's an archaeological dig going on up on the terrace above the harbor in Kaufman Cove, and it's an excavation by a team of contracted archaeologists and some Forest Service archaeologists, interns and volunteers with a lot of local participation, excavating a site that is at least 4,000 years old.
Terry Fifield has been the Forest Service archaeologist on Prince of Wales Island since 1994. He has a master's degree in anthropology and has worked with both the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the National Park Service.
One of the neat things about this project is that it covers a time frame that we don't have much information for. That period from 4,000 years ago to contact, there really have been very few small pieces of archaeological sites excavated in Southeast Alaska, and so what we're doing is hoping to fill in one of the big gaps in our understanding of the cultural sequence in the area.
This cultural site is one of many in the Tongass National Forest. It's located on state land on Prince of Wales Island in the town of Kaufman Cove. This entire area, however, was within the traditional homeland of the Tlingit people of the Stikine, Alaska Natives now centered in Wrangell. This dig is more than an effort to learn about early Alaska residents. It's also an example of official consultations that take place whenever a Forest Service activity affects Native Americans.
9 years ago, when the concept of this project started developing, we worked with the Wrangell Cooperative Association and the Tribal Council over there as a partner in a memorandum of understanding that we developed between the tribe, the city, a couple of state agencies, the Forest Service, and the University of Oregon. And it was in that partnership that we developed the research design that was the impetus for getting this project going.
Surprisingly to some, the consultations between the Forest Service and Alaska Natives take place on a government-to-government level. The reasons for that go back a long time.
When Russia sold Alaska to the United States, the Tlinkits immediately reacted. They said, we own the land, and if you want to buy it from the rightful owners, then that's what you have to do. You have to buy it from Alaska Native people.
Dr. Rosita Whirl, a Tlingit from the village of Klukwan, is president of the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute and has a PhD from Harvard in anthropology. She's also an expert on Tlingit culture in southeast Alaska.
The Tlinkits are very clear in terms of understanding their role as a sovereign entity and also the obligations, the correct relationship that should exist between the federal government and Native people.
The origins of that special relationship come from a variety of laws and policies that identified roles for federally recognized tribes and required consultation by federal agencies. They include traditional patterns of tribal sovereignty, the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 that established the tribal governments, laws like the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, National Historic Preservation Act, National Environmental Policy Act, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, and more. In addition to the traditions and laws, presidential executive orders direct federal agencies to consult and work with federally recognized tribes on a government-to-government basis. And more recently, language was attached to several pieces of federal legislation directing all federal agencies to consult with Alaska Native corporations on the same basis as federally recognized tribes.
When the federal government initiates an activity that may have an impact on Native culture or Native land, the federal government is required to consult with Native people.
Although these consultations have legal and historic precedents, they also take place for another reason. Both the Forest Service and Alaska Natives have long traditions of resource stewardship. Thus, both use consultations and cooperative programs to accomplish common goals. One part of the cooperation in this case is on-site inspections by representatives of the Wrangell Cooperative Association. Richard Reinhardt Sr. was one who visited the Kaufman Cove site.
Well, that's what Chief Shakes did. He owned all these other areas by his people, not only him.
You know, that's why I do a lot of the tribal consultation and government-to-government work for the Forest Service on Prince of Wales Island, and when we plan timber sales or new roads or recreation sites even, we always send announcements to the tribal offices, not only on Prince of Wales Island, but also Wrangell and sometimes Ketchikan and sometimes Cake, depending on where the project is on the island, so that people whose traditional lands are being affected by our projects know and can comment. That's what it's about, yeah.
Well, before they never did that, and that the government with our Native people are doing okay as far as we're concerned, but we always want to know what is going on. And without us, then government to government ain't working.
Site visits are one way to keep the consultations working. The Wrangell Cooperative Association stays apprised of developments at the dig. This offers an opportunity for questions and answers.
Everything cultural from the dirt is all going through these screens.
And there's a lot of firecracked rock. There's some shell here from the shell bin that Cheryl has.
Yeah. Do you find any valuable rock, say, like copper or anything like that?
No, we haven't found anything like that.
A possible slate flake. Somebody was starting to make a tool. This is the piece they broke off. We have what's probably a sacrum fragment. I'm not positive, but a vertebrae, a small land mammal, maybe a deer. There's round vertebrae or fish vertebrae, backbones.
After all the digging, searching, and sifting, the actual artifacts are bagged and saved. Later, they'll be cataloged and stored.
Down at the archaeological site in Kaufman Cove, they've been excavating now for 4 days, and these are all the artifacts that they've recovered so far. What you can see here is this very straight edge where when people manufactured slate tools, the first thing they did is rough the tool out into the approximate shape that they wanted the end product to be. So what they would do is take this roughly shaped tool and then rub it across the surface. Oh. And the idea would be that it would smooth all those bumps off and turn it into a highly polished, nice form of an arrowhead or a spear point. So it would end up looking something like this. So.
In addition to this continuing consultation, the archaeological dig is also used as an educational tool. Local volunteers help with the excavation, and visitors are given tours that emphasize the importance of the site as a cultural place of the Tlingit people and as a source of scientific information.
Kaufman Cove was the homeland of the Stikine Tlingit. It was part of their territory. From some accounts, it would suggest that the Stikine Tlingit were some of the most powerful and populous of all the Tlingit groups. The Forest Service and the state have spent quite a bit of time consulting with the Wrangell Tlingit people, the Stikine Tlingit people, as part of our government-to-government consultation with them. And we want to make sure that we're doing the work in a sensitive manner and it's one that's respectful of their wishes. So we have a representative of the Wrangell tribe here today.
And what I see so far, I'm satisfied with it because I'm a councilman of the native group in Wrangell. And that was our people that owned this area at one time. So far, I think it's all right.
Very good. I think that's really is the essence of government-to-government relationship. Yeah. It's just openly working with each other on these things.
This working together is perhaps most sensitive when human remains are discovered. Terry Fifield was involved several years ago when 10,000-year-old bones were found in a cave on Prince of Wales Island. His actions then still serve as an example of how the consultation process between the Forest Service and Alaska Natives should work.
He immediately contacted all the tribes, and the tribes talked with the Forest Service, and they made a decision. And I think it was a very profound decision. People don't talk about it a lot, but it really shows that when you have immediate consultation, when you have respectful consultation between the federal government and tribes, that good things can happen.
I think they probably brought it up here and they probably have houses across here.
Over the course of thousands of years of living in southeast Alaska, Native people have gained a vast storehouse of knowledge about this rainforest ecosystem. Those of us who manage the land today recognize that fact, and we're committed to integrating that cultural heritage and that traditional ecological knowledge into today's National Forest Management programs. For the Tongass National Forest, I'm Pete Griffin.